3 signs you're a peasant. Gas at $5? Man, that's too expensive. That's number 1. I can't believe how much we spend on groceries. I only have 3 meals and we spent $50. A loaf of bread and a gallon of milk are twice the price they used to be. Here's number 3. Rent has skyrocketed. I can't even imagine how much it is. It's $2,000 more than when we started living here. What do all 3 of these have in common? What type of complaints are all these? Inflation. Now humor me for a second. Have you ever heard a rich man complain about the price of gas? What about the price of a gallon of milk? Loaf of bread? What about his rent? Oh wait, he's not renting. What about not even rich? What about just financially free? Upper middle class? Anyone that just doesn't have to work another day in their life? Anyone retired? Have they ever complained about the price of gas? I haven't heard it. Have you? When you hear an inflation complaint, it's only the peasants. And by peasant, I don't mean to be derogatory. I don't mean to be rude. Peasant, by definition, is just a common man. So most people are peasants. Especially in today's society, about 90% of Americans are considered common men, peasants. But nobody asks the great questions. Nobody asks why inflation only affects them. Why does it not affect the rich person? Why is life set up that way? I want you to write this down. Assets that appreciate over time hedge inflation. Assets that appreciate over time hedge inflation. If you know nothing about economics, that's a good place to start. You can look up supply and demand, but assets that appreciate over time hedge inflation. Now, there's all different types of assets. You got stocks, you got bonds, you got real estate, you got commodities, you got sports teams, you got everything. But what we really want to be looking at is assets that appreciate over time, because that's where we're going to get the hedge of inflation. Now, when we say appreciate, how is something appreciated? How is something more valuable tomorrow than it is today? A real estate property, the actual property, you can make upgrades to it, but let's take a house, for example, that had nothing done to it. For 2 years, nothing was done to it. It's the same exact house. Let's say there was no depreciation at all. In those 2 years, how did it gain value? It's the same property. It's because it didn't gain value. It didn't gain value at all. It's the same house. What happened was the dollar lost value. And that, my friends, is what we consider inflation. So back to the peasants and the rich people. So now we're saying, why does inflation only affect them and has no effect on rich people? And that's because broke is a condition of the mind, not of the pocket. Someone once said, if you took all the money in the world, divided up equally amongst every person, it would soon be back in the same pockets. How brilliant. See, if you took a poor person, a peasant, you gave a rich person the same amount of money. So you strip the rich person of all their money and you give them the exact economic value that the poor person has. You would just watch how the decisions they make, the actions they make are so completely different. Let's say you gave them both 50K, okay? So you gave the peasant, he has an economic value of 50K. He's got whatever for his daily expenses. Let's say they both have the same daily expenses, 10K, whatever. What he would do with the remaining money and what the rich person would do with the remaining money is absolutely mind-boggling. The peasant would invest in depreciating assets, things like cars, things like clothing. Now, I'm not saying to dress naked every day. I am saying that if someone gives you money and you don't have a business or something growing your monetary value, there's no purpose in buying something like a car or nice clothing because it's going to lose value over time and you're not going to gain and grow your economic standing. Now, if you gave that rich person the same 50K, let's say because you stripped him of all his economic value, he still has the 10K of daily expenses, what would he do with the remaining 40K? Things like property, things like stocks, things like bonds. Assets that appreciate over time hedge inflation. See, because what inflation does is it's simple economics, very simple, supply and demand. What has happened here is, let's say there's $1 in circulation and relating it to this one house, okay? This one house. This one house is worth $1, okay? They are equal. What has happened here is we have a monetary system called the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has the ability to print money whenever they want. Whenever they so choose, they can manufacture more dollars. So what happens here is simple supply and demand. Because there's more dollars in supply and the house stayed the same, there didn't become another house. There's not two houses now. And what has happened is this asset has appreciated over time. As opposed to the peasant. Let's say instead of these things, instead of the cars and the clothing, instead of that, they bought nothing. And they saved all that money. Now what would happen is their buying power slowly decreases. So that stick of gum that I mentioned earlier, that used to cost 10 cents to buy, now they have to pay $1 to buy it. So their buying power has gone down. So while they still have 40K down here in their savings account, their actual buying power has gone down. So it's kind of an illusion. You have the same money, but you kind of don't. You are not able to buy the things you were able to buy 5-10 years ago. So assets that appreciate over time hedge inflation. And the difference between the peasant and the rich man is the mind, because if you gave them the same money, they would make completely different choices with that money. So that's why only the peasants are affected by inflation.